Picture this. It's 1993. You're at a packed press conference. The man at the very center of the biggest financial scandal in India's history leans into the microphone and says that. He's not just admitting to paying a bribe, he is accusing the most powerful man in the entire country of taking it. Wow. That single sentence lit a firestorm that was about to get a whole lot bigger.
So this was the man, Harshad Mehta, a stockbroker who had just been arrested for a massive multi-billion rupee scam that absolutely crashed the market. And now, here he was, turning the tables, claiming he was just a scapegoat for the people at the very, very top. So you have to ask yourself, how on earth does a guy from a pretty normal, lower-middle-class family get into a position to accuse a prime minister of taking a bribe? Who was Harshad Mehta? To figure that out, we've got to look at his incredible rise and his even more spectacular fall. To really get the scam, you first have to understand the man. And his story, believe it or not, doesn't start in the fancy boardrooms of Bombay. It starts in a small city called Raipur, with a family that was just trying to make ends meet.
Now, what's really wild here is just the speed of it all. I mean, look at this. In 1977, he's a clerk, making a tiny salary. He tries his hand at everything, selling cement, trading diamonds, you name it. But it's the stock market where he really finds his calling. And by 1984, we're talking just 7 years later, he's not an outsider anymore. He's a licensed broker on the floor of the Bombay Stock Exchange. And he wasn't just any broker. See, in the market, you've got your bears. They're the pessimists, betting prices will fall. And then you have the bulls, the optimists, who buy everything, expecting prices to just keep rising. Harshad Mehta wasn't just a bull, he was the big bull. He had this almost magical belief that the market could only go up, and he was so good at convincing everyone else to believe it too. And if you want to see his impact, just look at this one number, 4467. Between 91 and 92, he basically single-handedly pushed the Bombay Stock Exchange's main index, the Sensex, from around 1,200 points all the way to this peak. He more than quadrupled the market in just over a year. It was a frenzy like nobody had ever seen before, and he was right in the middle of it all. And this wasn't just about numbers on a computer screen, right? The money was very, very real. He was living a life that was just unimaginable for most people in India at the time. A massive home overlooking the sea, a whole fleet of imported luxury cars, back when seeing even one was a huge deal. And get this, he became the country's single biggest taxpayer. He was paying more in taxes than some of the biggest industrial families. This story just perfectly captures the kind of guy he was. So, the story goes he's in an elevator with Anil Ambani, from one of India's richest industrialist families. Ambani compliments him on his brand new Toyota Lexus, a car that was incredibly rare at the time. And Harshad? He doesn't just say thank you. He pulls out the keys, hands him to Ambani, and just says, keep it. I mean, that's the level of audacity and insane wealth we're talking about here. But here's the thing. To have that kind of power, to move markets like that, you need a bottomless pit of money. Harshad didn't have one. But what he'd found was something even better. It was like the ultimate money glitch in the financial system, one that let him basically create money out of thin air. And this is the key to the whole story. Back then, stockbrokers couldn't legally just borrow tons of money from banks to play the market. So where did all these billions of rupees come from? Well, the answer lies in a tiny, totally overlooked slip of paper.
It all came down to this thing called the bank receipt, or BR. Okay, so in simple terms, banks have to keep a certain amount of their money in safe government bonds. When one bank needed quick cash, it would lend these bonds to another bank for a few days. The bank receipt was just the IOU. It was a promise that the bonds were real and would be delivered soon. The whole system was built on trust.
And here's how he exploited that trust. It was a four-step dance. Step 1, Harshad puts himself in the middle as the broker between the banks. Step 2, he convinces a couple of small, willing banks to issue him fake bank receipts, IOUs for bonds that just didn't exist. Step 3, the bank buying these bonds writes a huge check, but instead of going to the seller bank, that money gets illegally funneled right into Harshad's personal accounts. And finally, Step 4, he takes those hundreds of crores, pumps them into the stock market, drives up prices, sells for a massive profit, and then returns the original loan amount to the bank, often before anyone even knew it was gone. He was using the banking system's own money, completely interest-free, to play the market. It was brilliant, and it was totally illegal.
For over a year, this incredible cycle just kept going. He was like a magician, just creating money from nothing,
But, like any magic trick, it relies on nobody looking too closely behind the curtain. And eventually, someone did.
The beginning of the end wasn't some dramatic police raid or a secret whistleblower. Nope, it was a totally routine audit at the State Bank of India. An official was just trying to balance the books and noticed, hey, the value of government bonds we think we have doesn't actually match the official records.
And we're not talking about a small rounding error. The difference was a jaw-dropping 574 crore rupees. That's billions of rupees worth of government securities that were just missing from the bank's books. And when they started pulling on that thread, they found every single one of those missing securities led back to deals brokered by one man, Harshad Mehta.
Once that internal alarm went off, man, things just fell apart at lightning speed. Word leaked out to a journalist named Sucheta Dalal, and she broke the story wide open in the Times of India. Suddenly, this wasn't just a banking problem, it was a national crisis. The SEBI, India's top investigation agency, stepped in, and within weeks, Harshad and his brother were arrested. The party was officially over.
And the fallout? Well, you can see it right here. It was an absolute catastrophe. The market, which had been artificially pumped up by all this fake money, just collapsed. The Sensex went from that crazy peak of over 4,400 in April down to 2,600 by August. Countless small, everyday investors who had bought into the dream, they were completely wiped out.
But Harshad Mehta's story doesn't just end with his arrest. In fact, that's where the most complicated part of his whole legacy really begins. The debate over who he was and what he really represented is just as fierce today as it was back then.
He actually died of a heart attack while in prison in 2001, with dozens of legal cases still waiting to be heard against him. His death meant the biggest questions were left unanswered, and it just cemented his status as this almost mythical figure of debate in India's financial history.
And this really frames the two sides of the argument perfectly. On one hand, you've got Harshad the scamster. The facts are clear, he used fake documents, he manipulated the market for his own game, and he caused a lot of ordinary people to lose everything. But there's another way to look at it. To some people, he was a victim of a broken system. He was this ambitious outsider who just exposed the deep rot and the loopholes in Indian banking. And for that, he was made a scapegoat by the powerful insiders and politicians who were probably also benefiting. And that brings us right back to the final lingering question. And it's one that really doesn't have an easy answer. Was he just a criminal mastermind who broke the system and got caught? Or was he something way more complex? A financial genius who was simply punished for being a little too good at outsmarting a flawed system? That's the question his story leaves us with.